The morning had barely warmed up when Officer Travis Monroe turned on the squad car radio and began his patrol with no real sense of purpose. It was just another day in that suburban neighborhood, all dressed up with white fences and neatly trimmed trees, like life there was just for show. He sighed with that kind of boredom that comes when routine becomes wallpaper, and the mission to serve gets lost between yawns and apathy. But that's how the worst mistakes are born, in the silence, where no one expects anything. And in that silence, something began to stir. Anyone who's ever lived in a residential neighborhood knows that it speaks, even when it's quiet. It's in the whispers behind curtains, the identical grocery bags, the cautious good mornings, and the dogs that bark at those who don't seem to belong. That day, a man walking with a backpack was enough to trip an invisible wire. Not because he did anything, but because, in that place, looking different was enough to be suspicious. That feeling of not belonging, it's more common than we admit. The radio call was short and emotionless. Black male walking with a backpack. No threat described, no suspicious behavior. It's just that. If you've worked in a corporate setting, you may know a similar version. When a black woman gets promoted and people start asking, who does she know up top? Prejudice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, disguised as concern. And Travis, without a second thought, replied, I'll check it out. Irony hides in the small things. Travis, who grew up in a home where phrases like, I don't trust anyone who looks shady, were dinner table talk, saw himself as someone who doesn't let things slide. The danger sometimes wears a mask of normal. It's that casual. Racism, disguised in group chat jokes, or in the way someone clutches their purse in the elevator. If you've never seen it happen, count yourself lucky. As he drove through those freshly paved streets, Travis looked for the man. He didn't know his name, didn't know his story. He only knew his skin color and the object on his back, the backpack, which in many places is just a backpack, but in certain neighborhoods becomes an alert, and that's where the absurdity lies, when an object turns suspicious depending on who's holding it. It's like treating a bicycle as a weapon because the rider is poor. There he was. The man walked calmly, wearing a suit that looked like it had history, not the smell of mothballs. He seemed about 60-something, shoulders firm, eyes straight ahead. Travis pulled over and felt that twinge in his gut, not from fear but from reflex. The kind of reflex built over years, not by laws, but by culture. And culture, my friend, shapes even what we call normal. You know that look people give you like you don't belong somewhere? That's what Travis felt. But in reverse, he was the one giving the look. And right there, in that squad car with the AC blasting, and his uniform crisp, he held the power, or so he thought. Because when power is built on assumptions, it never lasts long. But the damage. Oh, the damage is immediate. Travis stepped out of the car with mechanical steps, like he was following an old script. He didn't ask the man's name, didn't offer help. He just decided, this guy doesn't match the neighborhood. It's like that store manager who assumes the black customer can't be shopping for her own wedding, or the mall security guard who chooses who to follow based on skin color. These decisions are quick, but their roots run deep. And the most curious part, Travis wasn't some movie villain. He wasn't a monster. He was just another man who'd never stopped to question himself. The kind who believes he's doing the right thing because that's how I was trained. And that's the real danger, when the mistake looks like protocol. The neighborhood was silent, but the storm had already begun, and everything that comes next changes everything. He was just there, walking like someone who knew the way, like someone who'd walked that sidewalk hundreds of times before. His suit was sharp, his steps steady, shoulders held high with the ease that only comes from years well lived. Kind of man who didn't need to prove anything and yet was judged at first glance. Travis saw him before he even thought, or better said, he thought with the part of him trained to see threat. Morning, sir. What are you doing around here? But the question didn't come with kindness. It was dry, sharp, spat out, like someone demanding ID, not offering a greeting. Carter responded like only the wise do, with composure. I'm going to visit my mother. House number 311. Simple, direct, unshaken. And that's what bothered Travis. The man didn't look down. Carter's authority was quiet, effortless, not the kind you impose, but the kind that radiates. And what often disturbs more than shouting is the calm of someone who won't bow. Travis felt that discomfort grow, like a chill starting at the neck that turns into a nameless rage. And when authority is fragile, it shouts. That's when he said it, get on the ground. No cause, no logic. Just because he could. And let's be clear, Carter didn't refuse. They questioned as any aware citizen should. But he didn't flee, didn't resist, didn't yell. His dignity was a shield, and even standing still, he seemed larger than Travis in full uniform with his taser in hand. That, my friend, is something some men never learn to handle when someone's self-respect doesn't kneel before their power. What Travis did next. Well, it wasn't about safety, it was about ego. Pulled the taser like someone grabbing wounded pride, desperate to shoot back, and he fired. The sound cracked through the air like a comma between two versions of the same story. The one, who judges, and the one judged for simply existing. Then Travis laughed. Laughed like he thought he'd won, not knowing what he had just set in motion. Travis's laugh wasn't just a sound, it was a symbol, a reflex shaped by backyard barbecues and watch out for those kinds of people jokes. That poisoned humor that pretends to be harmless, but twists the way someone sees the world. That's the real danger when prejudice hides behind tradition and humiliation becomes routine. That laugh wasn't just about Carter, it was about everything he stood for. Carter fell, yes. His body responded to the shock, but his spirit, that never hit the ground. And that's what separates the great from the small, the way they rise. Some say pain reveals character. But sometimes, it's the silence after pain that shouts the loudest. And in that moment, Carter was the tallest man on that street, even from his knees. You know that moment when you realize you've gone too far, but there's no rewind button? Travis started feeling it. The second Carter's body hit the ground, it was fast. But awareness, when it decides to show up, doesn't need much time. And if you've ever made a terrible mistake, you know how it feels. First, the heat in your face, then the weight in your chest. Travis felt both, but he had no clue what was coming next. And here's the thing, the world doesn't need more force. It needs more clarity, because force without awareness turns into tyranny. Travis had the badge, the uniform, the taser, but Carter had something no system can fabricate: integrity. And when integrity meets injustice, what looks like imbalance becomes reckoning. And that, as you'll see, changes everything. The ground was still trembling beneath Carter's body when he began to gather himself. It wasn't a rushed or theatrical movement. It was the kind of rise that's political, not just physical. He took a deep breath, braced himself with calm, and stood up like a man who's done this before. His eyes, when they met Travis's, didn't hold rage. They held something far stronger, unshakable dignity. There were no shouts, no insults. Just a heavy silence that said more than any accusation ever could. Then he spoke. His voice was firm, measured, the kind of voice that commands a courtroom, not out of ego, but because truth carries weight. My name is Dr. Harold Eugene Carter, retired federal judge, Southern District of Georgia. You've just committed a federal crime. And in that moment, everything changed. Travis's expression melted like wet paper. That smug laugh from seconds ago vanished into thin air. His eyes widened like a kid caught cheating on a test, except this test came with federal consequences. Because now, he realized he hadn't just wronged a random man. He'd targeted someone who didn't just know the law, but embodied it. And suddenly, there was nowhere to hide. Travis's partner, who had been silently observing, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't routine. This wasn't just another stop. It was a moment that should never have happened, and now it was happening in full view. The air felt thicker, as if the environment itself understood the weight of the situation. It was like time paused out of respect for the truth that had just been spoken. There are moments in life that flip the script you thought you had memorized. For Travis, this was it. still holding a warm taser, while the name Carter echoed in his mind like a siren. This was no longer a black man with a backpack. It was a judge, a father, citizen, and everything Travis had ignored now surged to the surface. 'Cause when truth stands tall, pretending not to see is no longer an option. Carter didn't gloat, didn't escalate. He simply pulled out his federal ID with the calm of someone who has nothing to prove, just facts. To let speak. The gold emblem caught the morning sun, shining like a seal of legitimacy that shattered any biased narrative. And in that moment, the one trembling wasn't Carter anymore. It was Travis. Behind the curtains, neighbors began recording with their phones. In the age of social media, no one's just a witness. Everyone becomes a judge, too. And that video, raw and unedited, already carried a silent verdict, because you don't need subtitles when the image says it all. And that image said everything. Carter then, without a word, walked toward his mother's house. He climbed the steps slowly, as if honoring time itself. The door opened before he could knock. And when he stepped inside, he closed it with the same serenity he'd carried through the entire ordeal. Outside, the squad car remained, but the authority had quietly switched sides. You see, sometimes justice doesn't come with a gavel or a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in the posture of someone who refuses to bend, in the eyes of someone who's lived too much to stay silent. Carter didn't need to yell, didn't need to strike back. He just stood up, and that's when everything starts to fall apart. Because when a person is forced to face their own conscience, there's no going back. Travis tried to speak, but his mouth felt full of stones. Sweat slid down his temples like his body understood the weight of the mistake before his mind did. "I'm sorry, sir, this was a misunderstanding." The words came out hollow, like trying to put out a fire with breath. But by now there was no control left. It was too late to contain the damage. Carter, steady, without raising his voice, pulled his wallet from his coat. The motion was calm, almost ceremonial. And when the golden seal of the federal judiciary caught the morning sun, it was like a curtain fell. This wasn't just a man with a backpack. It was the living image of the authority Travis claimed to represent. Now the roles had reversed. Travis's partner, who had kept a neutral stance until then, stepped closer. He wanted to see with his own eyes what he already feared. Carter handed him the document like stamping a sentence. No anger, no hurry. The silence between them said it all. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was shame. And shared shame cuts deeper. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to stir. Curtains opened discreetly. Cell phone cameras started recording. The usual silence of a suburban morning was replaced with a kind of tension that couldn't be hidden. The kind that precedes a scandal. This was no longer an isolated moment. It was a story about to explode. If you've seen that happen, you know there's no going back. Carter didn't say another word. He simply turned his back and walked. With the serenity of a man who knows every step now carries weight. He climbed the porch steps like one approaching an altar. And when the door opened, he disappeared inside as if closing a chapter. What remained outside was a vacuum, and Travis stuck inside it. At the station, the radio crackled before chaos began. Within minutes, everyone knew. The name Dr. Harold. Eugene Carter raced through the halls like a nervous whisper. The leadership's first reaction wasn't outrage, it was panic. Because the reality hit even before the internet lit up. They hadn't messed with just any civilian. They had touched the system itself. The background check was quick. Everything matched. Valid documents. Clean history. Publicly recognized. A retired federal judge, known for his work in civil rights. The computer confirmed what their eyes already knew. But sometimes knowing hurts more than ignorance. With every line that popped up on the screen, the room grew quieter. Travis said nothing. Not because he was told to, but because he couldn't. He sat on the edge of the desk, hands trembling, trying to figure out when he lost control. But the truth is, it was never in control. What he thought was routine was actually a broken pattern. And when patterns are exposed, they don't forgive those who follow them blindly. And it's in that kind of silence that institutions tremble. Not when someone yells, but when everyone looks around and has nothing to say. question was no longer, what do we do with Travis? It was deeper. How many Travises do we still have in here? And that question, the one no one wants to answer, is exactly what begins to erupt in the next chapter. Every person carries stories they didn't write but that shape their decisions. Travis Monroe grew up in a household where certain comments were passed off as harmless jokes. Phrases that normalized distrust disguised as caution and prejudice. Wrapped in so-called common sense, it was passed down like an heirloom over family lunches and TV crime shows. And slowly, it took root. At 19, he decided to become a police officer. He was chasing pride, maybe purpose. But what he found was a daily routine that demanded fast responses, steady nerves, and little room for self-reflection. Travis didn't realize it, but over time, he swapped introspection for reaction. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit. The kind of habit that grows when no one stops to question what they've learned. During training and patrols, he noticed unspoken patterns, silent codes, repeated warnings, behaviors he began to imitate almost unconsciously. The problem is, when we operate on autopilot, it becomes hard to separate perception from truth. Travis thought he was just following protocol. His career moved steadily. No medals, no scandals, some tense moments, a few questionable stops, but nothing that raised official concern. On paper, he was just another officer doing his job. But behind the badge was someone who never stopped to examine his own lens. And that's where danger lives, in routines that dull our judgment. It's important to be clear, Travis wasn't a villain. He was someone who'd never been invited to look inward. Amid long shifts, unpredictable calls, and constant pressure, he learned to trust his instincts. The issue? Some of those instincts were never questioned. And when that happens, it's easy to act with confidence, even when you're dead wrong. The video of his encounter with Carter went viral within hours. White officer Tase's retired black judge. The headline left no room for ambiguity. The footage showed more than just an action. It showed context. And for the first time, Travis experienced what it feels like to be publicly judged without a chance to explain. What used to be invisible was now undeniable. The impact was immediate. Colleagues who once felt familiar now kept their distance. The group chats went quiet. Maybe for the first time, Travis knew what it felt like to be looked at with suspicion. What hurt wasn't just the backlash. It was realizing he might have been blind for far too long. And now, it was too late to rewind. The past isn't an excuse, but it does reveal the road someone's walked. Understanding that road is necessary for any real change. Travis didn't wake up one day and decide to mess up. He simply never learned to ask if he was getting it right. That lack of self-questioning was his silent downfall. Because anyone can make mistakes, but not everyone chooses to learn from them. And in the middle of that discomfort, something began to shift. The incident sparked internal conversations. Looks that once went unnoticed now lingered with intention. It wasn't about assigning blame, it was about finally asking questions no one wanted to ask. And the most unsettling one was still on its way. What if this wasn't a slip-up, but a sign of something deeper? The station felt like a different place. It wasn't the same environment where radio static mixed with shuffling paperwork and poorly timed jokes. Now, everything was whispered. Closed doors, avoided eye contact, muffled conversations behind frosted glass. Once Carter's name appeared in the report, no one dared to call it routine anymore. Leadership moved fast, but not with strength, with fear. The concern wasn't justice, it was public image. The message was clear. Let's handle this quietly, out of court. Travis was told to disappear for a while, to say as little as possible, to ride the wave silently. It was the classic, don't pour gasoline on it. But there was already too much fire for any towel to smother. The proposal was simple and cold. A formal apology, press statement, and complete silence afterward. From the outside, it might look like damage control. To Carter, it felt like cowardice. What hurt wasn't just the taser. It was the system pretending this was an exception, not a symptom. They reached out to Carter personally, offered a private meeting, a formal retraction, a carefully drafted statement, but he refused. Not out of pride, but out of principle. He knew that accepting an empty apology was just another layer of the cycle. And as someone who spent a lifetime judging right from wrong, he couldn't let this be swept away as just another headline. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking change, and real change hurts. It hurts more than a bruised ego or institutional discomfort. Carter wasn't looking for applause or an audience. What he wanted was for this moment to spark a shift. It's not for him, but for those without a title who carried the same skin. Meanwhile, Travis was suspended from duty, from uniform, from himself. He didn't know if it was fear, guilt, or confusion, probably all three. The silence from the department was almost deafening. No one said it out loud, but the message was unmistakable. Stay quiet. And for the first time, he started to actually hear what that silence had been hiding all along. At home, he replayed the video again and again. He paused at the moment he laughed, and right there, something hurt. That laugh no longer sounded like him. It felt like a stranger's voice, someone wearing his face, but with eyes he didn't recognize anymore. That sense of estrangement was the first hint of something new. Awareness. Behind the scenes. Some colleagues muttered, he was unlucky. Nobody knew he was a judge. But Carter, speaking publicly, was precise. I wasn't attacked because I'm a judge. I was attacked because I'm black. The fact that I carry a title is irrelevant. And that's exactly the problem. A simple sentence, but sharp as a blade. And that's when the story changed course. Because when someone refuses to accept silence as a solution, the echo starts to disturb. The press didn't let it go. Public pressure grew. And even in his silence, Travis could feel it. This wouldn't disappear. Not this time. What came next wouldn't be buried, it would be broadcast. The city wasn't whispering anymore, it was shouting. Signs appeared on corners, on walls, and all over social media. Ordinary people flooded the streets with calm fury, like they could no longer swallow injustice in silence. What if he wasn't a judge? The posters read. The question struck harder than any answer the police or the press could offer. The video spread with unbelievable speed. It wasn't just the taser image, it was what it represented. A symbol. An old wound reopened in front of the cameras. In the voices of the protesters, there wasn't a thirst for revenge. There was a thirst for justice. And when justice becomes collective, it becomes an avalanche. Interviews, talk shows, live streams. Everyday people shared stories similar. Two Carters, ones that didn't end with survival or headlines. What was outrage for some was memory for others. And that's the power of storytelling. When a personal story exposes a pattern many would rather ignore, Carter was invited to speak on national television. He appeared with the same composure as always, sharp suit, steady gaze. I wasn't attacked because I'm a judge. I was attacked because I'm black. My title only caused surprise afterward, and that surprise is the real problem. The quote swept the country like wildfire. It gained traction, gained strength. What's striking is that Carter never raised his voice. He didn't wave flags. He didn't give fiery speeches. Simply told the truth with the calm of someone who's lived too long to waste time sugarcoating. And maybe that's why his words cut deeper than any megaphone. He was impossible to ignore. The protests grew. Families, teenagers, elders, lawyers, artists, people from all backgrounds showed up with signs, t-shirts, and cameras. They didn't rally for Carter, they rallied for what he revealed. And that's the core of every genuine uprising. When it stops being about one name and becomes about shared meaning. Meanwhile, inside the police department, discomfort turned into unrest. No one could pretend it was just an isolated case anymore. The noise outside began to echo inside. Travis heard it. His colleagues heard it. No more jokes in the hallways. The silence had shifted, because the noise outside had a name, a face, color, and it wasn't going away. Carter stayed firm, calm, unshaken. He gave interviews, joined public forums, and kept repeating the same sentence. I don't want to be the exception. Want no one to need a title to be respected? Every time he said it, more people felt seen, because the fight wasn't just for him, it was for everyone. And that's when the unexpected turn begins. The next move doesn't come from the crowd. It comes from the institution. An official summons, a call for Travis to testify. Not as a victim, not as an officer, but as someone who's about to be confronted face to face with his own conscience. It was supposed to be just a testimony, a formality. But when Travis Monroe stepped into that makeshift hearing room, the air felt heavier than silence itself. His footsteps echoed in a space where every stare felt like judgment, not out of revenge, but out of truth. And truth is always the hardest to face. Carter was already there, sitting straight, aligned, calm, like someone carrying no guilt. Dr. Harold Eugene Carter. 66 years old, dark-skinned, short gray hair, full white beard, firm gaze, wore the same flawless navy blue suit. He didn't look like someone waiting for compensation. He looked like a man prepared to witness what remains when the badge comes off. Travis, on the other hand, couldn't hide. 38 years old, white, fair skin, slightly sunburned, short, dirty blonde buzz cut, cold blue eyes, unshaven. He wore civilian clothes, but nothing exposed him more than his own guilt. He avoided direct eye contact, until Carter looked at him, not with anger, not with haste, just ... looked. And that look was sharper than any formal accusation. It didn't scream. It didn't demand. It simply asked in silence, "Do you see yourself now?" Sometimes it's the absence of shouting that echoes the loudest. Travis wanted to speak, but his throat closed up. And maybe right then, he understood truly what it means to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Moment outside the hearing room, Carter asked to speak with Travis alone. The room was small, plain, no ceremony. "Have you ever looked in the mirror? Honestly?" he asked. The question came gently, with no tone of accusation. But its impact hit like a punch, because this wasn't about judgment. It was about reflection. Travis sat down. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes welled up, but he didn't look away. For the first time, he cried, not out of fear, but from shame. That raw kind of cry, without defense, without excuse, without mask. It was the beginning of a crack. But sometimes light only gets in through a crack. Carter didn't console him, nor did he condemn him. He just listened, because sometimes the most just act is giving someone the space to feel what they've caused. And truly feeling, is the first step toward transformation. There's no real change without legitimate pain, and Travis was finally feeling it. As they walked out, Carter turned and said, "You can keep erasing your tracks, or start leaving a path." It was both a warning and an opportunity. Not everyone gets a chance to rebuild what they broke, but only those who recognize the rubble can be part of the rebuilding. The room Travis had entered as a cop in crisis was now a mirror that told no lies. And in that reflection, he didn't just see Carter. He saw everyone who had gone through the same thing, without cameras, without justice, without a voice. And this was only the beginning of what came next. Nobody really knew what to expect after that, but one thing was certain: Travis Monroe would never be the same. When he handed over his badge, it wasn't with the air of someone following protocol. He did it as someone who truly understood that weight he had been carrying and could no longer bear. That piece of metal had never felt so light, nor so heavy.
Ow.
The resignation came without speeches, no spotlights, but it echoed louder than any headline. It wasn't just an exit, it was a signal. And that signal spread through the halls of the precinct, into newsrooms, into classrooms. For the first time, someone had stepped down, not from external pressure, but from internal conviction. Meanwhile, Carter was approached by state authorities. They wanted him to lead an independent commission on policing and racial bias. He thought, he reflected, and he accepted. But with one condition: it couldn't be symbolic. He wanted real tools, concrete actions, difficult conversations, because he knew a symbol without structure turns into decoration. Travis, by his own decision, volunteered for the project, and No one saw it coming. But he didn't do it for applause. He did it because he felt he owed it. It's not to erase what he had done, but to understand what had allowed him to do it. And for many, that was already more than most guilty parties ever did. Fresh Start doesn't erase, it transforms. The commission began by listening to stories. Stories of families, of young people, of mothers who buried their children without understanding why. Carter listened with the same respectful silence as always. Travis did too. And in listening, he realized he wasn't the central villain of that story, but he had been part of a system that created villains and then hid. The police began requiring mandatory anti-racism training. Many scoffed. Others laughed. But over time, discomfort turned into reflection. Carter would say, "It's not about shaming. It's about revealing." And over time, even the most resistant began to listen. Because truth doesn't shout, it stays. Travis attended every meeting. He listened. He questioned. He shared. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he stayed silent. But he was there. And his presence, strangely enough, made a difference. Because someone who has erred and admits it has the power to teach something no manual can. The real impact of one's own mistake. The project became a reference point. Other cities copied it. Schools made space for similar conversations. Some thought it was overblown. Others called it a fad. But those who truly lived it knew it was necessary, because a system that doesn't review itself repeats itself. Carter, with his calm voice, said this again and again. But there was still one final reckoning to be made. Not with the police, not with the media, but with history itself. Carter felt there was still something to say, something to visit, something to remember. And that path would take him back to a grave, to the name that had made him begin it all. The day was overcast, but it wasn't raining. The road was silent, lined with ancient trees that seemed to hold too many memories. Carter drove slowly, like someone who respects time. He wasn't wearing his blue suit that day. He wore only a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His destination wasn't a courthouse. It was a cemetery. He stopped before an old grave, covered with dry leaves and stubborn roots pushing through. The headstone read, Eugene Carter, 1933 to 1976. His father, a black man, a hard worker, unjustly imprisoned in the 1970s for a crime he never committed. He died young. He died silent. But he never died in his son's memory. Carter knelt with difficulty. His legs no longer had the same strength. But there, before that name, all fragility seemed to turn into armor. "Dad, I did it," he murmured. It wasn't pride he felt. It was peace, a bitter yet dignified peace, because there lay the origin of his fight. And now the cycle seemed to have closed. He told everything in a low voice. About Travis, about the taser, about the look, about a country still unable to deal with dark skin and upright posture. He spoke of the project, of the young people now studying police ethics with him. Of pain turned into a proposal, of error turned into a path, and the silence of the headstone was its most honest answer. Beside the grave, Carter placed his old judge's robe, not out of revolt, but out of respect. The justice he now sought no longer came from courtrooms. It came from the streets, from listening, from action. The robe there was a symbol of a mission completed, sometimes leaving something behind is the deepest way to move forward. When he stood up, he saw in the distance a black boy playing with a toy car on the sidewalk. He smiled briefly, not out of joy, but out of hope, because that boy could grow up in a different country, not through magic, but because men like Carter refused silence, chose to make noise with dignity. Later, he returned to the street, where it had all begun. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, steps steady. Neighbors, once wary, now greeted him with respect. It wasn't flattery, it was recognition. And each wave carried the weight of an unspoken apology. An elderly woman came out of the house at number 311 and waved from the porch. It was his mother, Still alive, still lucid. Her gaze said it all.
Gosh.
She had always known who he was, even when the world doubted, even when the officer couldn't see it. And in that moment, mother and son looked at each other as if closing a book without hurry. Carter smiled faintly, not a wide smile, but the kind that starts in the eyes and lasts longer than a moment, because the fight continues. But now, he already knew it's not always necessary to use your voice to be heard. Sometimes you just have to walk and let the street speak for you.